Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. So again, my name is Christy. I work in the Student Affairs Department at ITA, and we have a really big group today, so it's really exciting. I'm very happy to see you all here, so thanks for taking an hour this afternoon or evening for some of you to be here to learn about teaching English in South Korea and Japan. And what's really exciting too is that a lot of you, it seems like based on what you're saying, are looking to do different things, some Japan, some Korea, some public, some private. Some people are just getting started and maybe aren't really sure yet. So we're gonna go over a lot of that information today for both respective teaching markets. So a couple of little things before we get started. So again, you are all muted. This just really helps with the feedback during the webinar so everyone can hear very well. So if you do have a question, I do encourage you to please either type them into the chat box and we can actually go over them at the end of the webinar. So that would be great, just so that there's no interruption during the webinar, but I'm happy to stick around after for about 5 or 10 minutes and answer any of your questions at the end. Also, this is being recorded. So it usually takes a couple hours afterwards for it to process, but I'll get it emailed to all of you afterwards, and then it will also be available on the previously recorded webinars document that you guys have access to as well. So you will have a recording, so this definitely isn't the last time you'll hear all of this information. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we are going to start with South Korea today. So a couple of things. Why teach English in Korea? Why is this a market that anybody should really be focusing on? Well, first of all, it is one of the largest English teaching markets in the world. So there's approximately 20,000 English teachers that are currently in Korea. And no, this does not mean it's a saturated market. There are lots of positions to be had and held there, and really great positions. So it's just a really high demand in Korea. It's also a really good market because you can save money and pay off maybe any debt that you have. A few of my coworkers who have taught there actually paid off some of their student loans after school by teaching in Korea. So it's a really good market if you're looking to save some money. It's also a great market for benefits. If that's something that's important to you, like having your airfare, your housing, medical insurance, receiving severance pay, vacation time, even bonuses and things like that. If that's something that's, really important to you during your experience in teaching English abroad, this is an awesome country to look into. And so this is a picture actually of one of my colleagues, and she was an ITA student, and I actually worked with her before she went to Korea I think about 4 years ago or so. And so she said, "You will fall in love with Korean culture, people, and food. I always felt safe and absolutely loved living in Seoul." So that is from Rose. Okay, so South Korea. Where are some markets that you can teach in? Well, there's a lot, to be honest. What's really cool about Korea is there are some big cities that you can teach in. There's more medium-sized cities, and then you can also go rural if that's an experience that you're really looking for. But I would probably say the 3 most common places for English teachers to go are Seoul, which you can see is more towards the north, and that's a capital of South Korea, and it has a very large expat community and lots of diversity. So if you love living in a big city, if you're looking for that, experience in Asia of living in a really cosmopolitan, modern place, Seoul would be a really good, location for you to consider. Also, Daegu, which is a little bit towards the southern middle part of the country, is another really good spot. Another popular location as well. It's surrounded by mountains. It's a little bit more secluded. But also a little bit more bigger sized city. So if that's something you're looking for, an awesome location to consider. And then Busan is more coastal, lots of beaches, a little bit more relaxed way of life. So another place to consider. So those are just kind of the 3 main areas that most people are looking at. Okay, so getting into the requirements for South Korea. So unfortunately, South Korea is a little bit strict on the side of having certain types of requirements for teaching there. So unfortunately, if you do not meet some of these requirements, it is going to be a little bit tough to find work in Korea. So let's get started. So you definitely will need your international resume and cover letter. This is something that we provide samples for you on, so you can find them in the job search guidance manual. And we also have a webinar as well that's called Preparing for Your Job Search. And this is an excellent webinar if you guys haven't seen it yet or if you haven't attended it yet. We really go through the resume step by step and tell you exactly what you should be including and why. And then we actually do the same for the cover letter as well. So that's really helpful because it is, you know, if you guys have seen it already, it is a different resume than probably what you're used to. So it's really good so you don't waste time putting together a resume that maybe won't necessarily work for teaching English abroad. So I really would recommend doing that first. It's kind of your first step. Next, you'll also need photos. So definitely a headshot, which is something we actually recommend just going ahead and putting on your resume. And for South Korea and Japan, what you'll really want to think about when you're taking your headshot is you want to look very professional in the photo, and think about the culture as well. They can tend to be a little bit conservative. So kind of think about what you're wearing. Something business casual is usually good. And then, you know, usually smiling is also good. They also like usually like a plain background. So if you have like a white or whitish wall behind you, that's good. I've also seen a few that have been done maybe in like a park or something, and I think that's okay too, just as long as it looks very professional and you look very approachable. Okay. Also, there may be some schools that ask you for a full body photo. So you could take it at the same time as you're taking your headshot, just a full body picture of yourself. So just make sure again that it looks professional. This isn't something that every employer is going to ask for necessarily, but it's good to have ready to go in case you are asked for it. Okay. And then absolutely make sure that you have a valid passport. So this is something you'll want to make sure that you have enough time left in your passport as well. And you do need to be from a native English-speaking country. And what I mean by native English-speaking country is one of the big seven. So the United States, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Ireland, Canada. Okay, so make sure that you are from or have a passport from one of those countries. That is a requirement from the Korean government to be able to actually hire you as an English teacher and issue the E2 work visa. Okay. Also, another big one is the criminal record check. So unfortunately, this does have to be 100% clean. Even minor misdemeanors or anything like that, anything that's even not a major felony, can affect your application for Korea. So absolutely, if it's something that you're worried about or you're not sure if you have something on your criminal record check, I definitely recommend going ahead and just ordering it and seeing if something is on there, okay? So what I'm also going to tell you guys too, for those of you who are from the US, particularly the FBI, if you look on their website right now, it says something like 3 to 4 months for it to be processed. So for those of you who might want to be in Korea in that amount of time, you can actually work with something called a channeler. So National Background Check is a channeler that we recommend, and they can print and get your certificates, I should say your criminal record checks to you in about 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, so much quicker, a little more expensive, but is a much quicker process. So just to kind of give you guys that tip there. And then, yeah, so another thing that you absolutely will need for South Korea is a 4-year university diploma from an accredited university. Okay, so if you are in school now and you want to apply, or you want to apply to Korea next fall, but you'll be getting your diploma in May, that's perfectly okay, just as long as you actually have that degree before you go to Korea. And you will need to get it notarized by a public notary. So typically, you know, a bank or a post office, or if you know someone that's a notary, that's the first step. And then you need to, after that, get it apostilled. Which is basically a notary used for international purposes. And so that can actually be done at your Secretary of State's office. Okay. After that, you do need university transcripts. So typically you'll just have to order them. They have to be the official copies directly from your university, and they should be sealed. So you want to get 2 to 3 of those. Also, you'll have to do a health statement. This isn't something you need to worry about, however, until you actually are starting to apply and get a job offer and sign a contract. But it is really important for Korea that you are not taking, like, any drugs will show up on your check, and that you don't have any communicable diseases. So those are kind of the main things that they're going to be looking for on that health statement. And then after you get to Korea, you will have to have an actual medical check by the doctor to firm up and finalize your visa. Okay, so that's kind of mostly what they're going to be looking for. And then 2 letters of recommendation is actually preferred to have if you're going to be teaching in a Hagwon or a private school. And then you'll absolutely need them if you're going to be doing the EPIC program or the public school program. Okay, so now we are going to go through, this is a big question for a lot of people who are looking at teaching in South Korea and Japan, what the differences are between going the public school route and the language school, or Hagwons. So Hagwons is the Korean word, so you'll hear me say that quite often. So when I say that, I do mean language schools or private language academies. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I'm going to kind of go through the major differences between the two. And also when I say public schools, you might also hear me say EPIC. That's just, you know, kind of the acronym for the program. So public school EPIC or language school Hagwons, okay? So with vacation days, with EPIC or the public schools, typically you'll get approximately 20 plus all national holidays in Korea, and there are quite a few of them. So you get pretty good vacation time. And then with the Hagwons, you'll get a little bit less. So you'll get usually around 10, and then national holidays as well. Something to keep in mind too is that you'll have to really read through your contract and just make sure you understand, but sometimes there are times of the year when they actually ask you to take your vacation time. So you might have a certain amount of days, but you have to take it at a certain time, or you might have to let them know in advance, or whatever that might be. So just make sure you read through your contract in full to know that. So healthcare. So with the public schools, usually the teachers pay about 50% received through Korea's national healthcare. For Hagwons, the type of healthcare and amount can vary between schools. However, I see typically with a lot of my students who go to work in Korea, they get about 50% covered as well. So that's pretty common. Okay. So with the location, now this is a big one. If you guys have a very specific place you're looking to be in South Korea, you might want to consider, you know, thinking about Hagwons, or at least having that be your plan B. Because with the EPIC program, you can really be placed throughout Korea. You can preference your location, you can apply to certain provinces. However, you know, at the end of the day, they really will place you where they need you. So that could be a rural location. So just kind of keep that in mind. You really want to be open-minded and, you know, maybe be open to where you're going to want to go. And then with the Hagwons, you can honestly choose wherever. So you can work with more than one recruiter. You can apply to multiple schools. You can do more than one interview to really choose your city or town or location. So you have a little bit more say when you're going through a Hagwon. Okay. So the teaching environment as well in the public schools, I mean, it could be 1 to 2 English teachers per school. It really depends. If you're placed in a bigger city or in a bigger area or bigger school, you might have more than that. But especially if you're in a more rural area, I mean, you could be the only English speaker in the school. However, if you're working for Hagwons, typically there's many English teachers per school. So if that's something important to you, like wanting to build a community and make friends with other English teachers, then, you know, that's something to consider. But if you're looking to really learn Korean and really get into the Korean culture, you know, maybe being in a smaller city is for you. So the types of students can also vary. With the public schools, you know, it's going to be your normal school age, so like pre-K through high school. And then with the Hagwons, it can really be any age. I mean, it could be children to adults. So it really depends on the Hagwon and what type of student that they cater to. Okay. So with the public schools as well, you're going to absolutely have bigger class sizes. So 25 to 35 students per class. And also I'll mention this later too, but that's a little bit more doable a lot of the time because you're actually going to be an assistant English teacher. So you'll have a Korean teacher in the classroom with you, you know, who usually they speak some level of English. So that's also another good thing if you're maybe a first-time teacher, maybe a little bit nervous about teaching your own classroom. That's kind of an added benefit because you will have a Korean teacher with you. However, for the Hagwons, you're going to be looking at much smaller class sizes. So usually 1 to 15 students per class. So a little bit smaller, but you will be the lead English teacher. You will not have a Korean co-teacher. So for those of you that really want to do your own thing, have your own classroom, not have to worry about another teacher, that would be definitely for you. So with the public schools as well, you're going to work a more normal school day. So I mean, probably somewhere around 8 to 4, you might have after school programs, meetings with parents, you know, really is going to depend, but it's a more typical school day as we think of. However, with Hagwons, and this is also really going to depend on the Hagwon that you're working for, but most contracts that I see are usually somewhere around 2 to 9 or 3 to 10 p.m. So a lot of times are more afternoon and evening hours. So after, you know, school is out or after work hours. Sometimes though I have seen morning hours as well, or even maybe afternoon during lunch. So it just really depends, but typically you can not expect like a normal school day. So if you are not a morning person, this actually might be for you. Okay, so with airfare. With the EPIC program, you will be reimbursed or paid for in advance by the schools. So you will have your entire airfare covered. Pretty much the same thing with Hagwons. However, I have been seeing lately, it's been shifting maybe in the past year or so. I've been seeing that the Hagwons are just paying for one way. So they'll either reimburse you or pay for it up front, usually just an economy ticket from a big city in your home country to a big city in Korea, depending on where you're going. So that is definitely something to think about. So definitely been seeing one way more lately on the Hagwon side. And then, as I mentioned, with the public schools, you'll be an ALT, an assistant language teacher, and then in the Hagwons, you'll be the lead teacher. The hiring time. So this is also a big thing to pay attention to as well. So for the public schools, they only hire on specific start dates. So right now they are actually, so EPIC is now hiring for the February start date. So I believe the start date is February 20th, 2019 this year. So currently now the applications are open. So if you guys are interested in that start date, I would get started, get your app in, work with one of our recruiters, which I will talk about in one of the upcoming slides. But get started. It is a sought after program. It is competitive and they can hire on a first come first serve basis. So definitely thinking about doing that pretty soon here. I can't remember exactly when the application will close, but usually a couple months before the start date. And then, so with Hagwons, however, they do hire year round. So there is a peak time typically around February or March, and then another peak time with EPIC's other hiring season or other start date, I should say, which is usually in July or August. However, I mean, pretty much whenever you want to go abroad and teach in a Hagwon, you can find work throughout the year. There's teachers leaving and coming and going all the time. There's positions opening very randomly throughout the year, so it can really happen for you whenever. Okay. Yeah, so with the Hagwons, you'll just want to I mean, we say about 4 to 6 months. For most people, I would say from start to finish for the Hagwons, it takes about 3 months. So by this, I mean, when you start applying, start gathering your documents, do your interviews, get hired, and head on the plane to Korea, usually for most people, it's about 3 months. EPIC, however, or the public schools could take a little bit longer just depending on when the start date is and when you start your application. Okay. Also, as you can see over here on the side, we have language schools. Our Hagwons are typically looking for teachers in their 20s and 30s. And that's not to say that they will not hire anybody at all older than that, but they are pretty set in that age group of hiring. But with the public schools, they do hire more up to the age of 62 technically, because that is the retirement age in Korea. So that is what they have on their website. Okay. Okay, so finding a job in Korea. So the first thing, like I said, you want to do is start thinking about your documents. Some of those documents can be really time sensitive. It can take a while to get them. So putting together your resume and cover letter, start thinking about that. And then next, what you'll want to do is work with recruiters. So for South Korea, we really do recommend working with recruiters. This is not, it's not a requirement. However, if you work with a good recruiter, they can really help you. If they work with good schools, they can play the middleman between the two of you, help you set up interviews, and we have some really good ones that we do recommend. And then with recruiters too, so for the Hog ones, you absolutely can work with more than one recruiter. That's not a problem. And it's actually pretty recommended just because they have each recruiter has their own relationships with schools in different areas, different openings. So if, maybe you want to teach in one place and that recruiter doesn't have any jobs there, you can check out another one and they might have jobs there, for example. Okay, so definitely think about that. And then for Epic, Epic, SMO, any of those, you'll only want to work with one recruiter. However, you should not submit your Epic application more than one time, okay? So you'll want to just pick one recruiter to work with. I typically recommend Greenheart Travel is awesome for Epic. They only do Epic. If you look on their website, it actually says that they have a fee. However, they waive that for all ITA students. So it shouldn't be a problem for any of you to work with them. And then a couple other recruiters that I would recommend is TEIK, T-E-I-K, Teaching English and Korea is what it means. They work with Epic and Hagwons. Reach to Teach works with Epic and Hagwons as well. And then Adventure Teaching is awesome for Hagwons, okay? Okay, so now we are going to move on to teaching English in Japan. So I know that was a ton of information about South Korea, and I see you guys are all typing in the chat box and answering each other's questions, which is so awesome. I love to see that, so thank you for everyone who is kind of participating in there, and I promise I will get to some of those at the end. So I know there are some questions about documents and things like that, so no worries. Okay, so let's dive into Japan a little bit here. So Japan does have a large job market. There are a lot of students in Japan learning English. And I've also actually heard before that Japan is one of the oldest English teaching markets. So actually one of the schools that we work for has been around since the early 90s, or I'm sorry, that we work with has been around since the early 90s. So it is a pretty old market, which is kind of cool. So lots of jobs and, lots of cool stuff going on there. Japan is a good place to save money. Maybe not as much as South Korea right off the bat. There is some startup costs typically more associated with teaching in Japan that you need to pay for. However, usually after the first few months or so, people are saving money. So absolutely, if that's something you're looking for in your experience, it is a good place to think about. And then also, if any of you are worried about safety or traveling abroad or moving to a huge city, Tokyo was voted the safest city in the world in 2017. And as you can see, lots of cool beaches, monkey park, and landmarks to see there. So, okay, so where to teach English in Japan? So very similar to South Korea. I mean, there are lots of positions to be had in some of the major cities, such as Tokyo, Nagoya, Kyoto, Osaka, Nagasaki. Lots of positions in some of these bigger cities. Fukuoka is a big one that quite a few of our alumni have worked in the past as well. But also, I mean, there are positions in the smaller and more rural cities as well. And then especially you can find that with the JET program. Which is the public school program in Japan, for those of you who don't know. So we'll definitely talk about that in a little bit more detail. So the requirements for teaching in Japan, you do need a 4-year degree from an accredited university or college. So very similar types of requirements for South Korea, but a few things are a little bit less strict. And your degree doesn't necessarily need to be notarized or apostilled as well. Also for Japan, what's pretty cool is that you do have to be a native English speaker or have a very, 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 very high fluency in English. But there are some possible opportunities for fluent non-native English speakers or people who are native English speakers, but maybe aren't necessarily from those big 7 countries that I mentioned. So maybe if you're from like, for example, some places in the Caribbean, native English speakers, but unfortunately they can't find work in Korea, but you absolutely could in Japan. I've worked with quite a few students from Jamaica, for example, who've been very successful in Japan. And then if you are a fluent non-native English speaker, not from the big 7, you do have to have a lot of your education, so a lot of your schooling growing up in English, and a lot of times also have gone to an English-speaking university as well. But they do absolutely open up their doors to those people who meet those requirements. Also with Japan, you do have to have a criminal record check, and it has to be very clean for the most part, I guess I'll say. So if you're looking to teach in an eikaiwa or a language school, you can, depending on the school, absolutely work for them if you have a more low profile crime on your criminal record check. Like a DUI can be on a case-by-case basis. If you have some minor misdemeanors, however, big felonies, big charges, definitely not. But if you have some smaller things going on there, they can usually deal with it on a case-by-case basis as long as you are an awesome teacher and you meet the requirements. However, this does not apply for the JET program. For the JET program, you definitely have to have a clean criminal record check. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with Japan that we did for South Korea. So go through the differences between the public school program or the JET program and teaching for language schools. So a lot of this is really similar that you guys will notice between Japan and Korea, what some of the differences are. But I'm going to go through them anyways, since some of you are very interested in Japan. So with the public schools, very similar to the EPIC program, you really can be placed throughout Japan. It's really, you can preference where you'd like to be, and I think they do try their best, especially if they really want you as a teacher, but they're really going to put you where they have the need. And a lot of times that need is in more rural or smaller communities. However, if you're going to teach in a language school, you can absolutely choose your city or town. So if that's really important to you, if you're really looking to be somewhere specific, then maybe the language schools would be the route to go. So again, the teaching environment could potentially be 1 to 2 ESL teachers per school in the JET program. But with a language school, there's usually lots of ESL teachers in the school. The type of students are going to be children, so elementary to high school for the JET program. So you'll have those normal public school ages. And then with language school, again, you could teach children or adults. So it really varies depending on what school you're working for and who their customers are. So the work hours and schedule, JET, again, will be like a normal school day. So typically 8 to 4, you might have some after school activities and things involved. But with the language schools, it could really vary depending on the school. Typically evenings are very common, so like after school or even after work hours. Okay. Airfare and housing, if you go through the JET program, is all completely provided. So with airfare, usually they will, I can't remember if they exactly reimburse you or if they actually pay for your ticket up front, but your housing is also included. So they will set you up typically like in a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment that's pretty furnished. So you'll have like your basic needs, like a bed and a desk, couch, things like that. But with the language schools, however, it's really, it's not as clear cut as it is in Korea, where you can absolutely expect those things. With Japan, it really depends on the employer. So I've seen a lot of times I don't see flights included, but I see some sort of housing included. So either the school provides you with housing, or they'll give you maybe some money towards housing, or maybe they'll pay you a little bit higher salary if they're not including housing. However, if housing is not included, typically your employer can help you find housing. So usually they're pretty good with that. Usually they'll have an agent or some recommendations or something like that. So if that is something that you aren't concerned about, just make sure you ask the employer as you're going through your interviews in Japan. Okay. So public schools, again, you will be an ALT, so you'll be an assistant language teacher, so you will have a Japanese co-teacher in the classroom with you. If you work in a language school, you will be the lead English teacher. So you'll have your own classroom and kind of be able to come up with your own activities. And a lot of people ask this question too. The majority of well-established language schools should have a curriculum already set in place for you, but you can kind of do what you want with it. You know, you can make your own lessons and plan your own activities around that curriculum, but just make sure you ask just to be sure. So hiring times with JET, there's really one major time each year, and it is a long hiring process. So as you can see below, if you take a look at the timeline, so really the info session is September to November. So kind of the information's out there, they have info sessions, and then the application is actually available now. And then it's usually open around October to November. So the exact dates do change every year. So make sure you just get onto the JET website so you can see. So right now it is open. So if you guys are interested in JET, please make sure that you are thinking about getting your application in pretty soon and looking into that and gathering all of your documents, okay? And then the deadline is usually sometime around December. If you pass the initial screening, they'll typically schedule interviews around January to February. If you, pass through or unfortunately do not, you will get your results in April, whether you were accepted into the program or not. And then typically you'll receive your placement, so where exactly you're going to be between May and June, and then you'll depart between July and August, depending on when the actual start date is. Oh, and someone just said that the JET application is November 17th this year, so thank you very much. So just keep that in mind. I mean, that's coming up in about a month or so, and there's quite a few things that you need to submit, so just make sure that you are on top of that, okay? So as you guys can see, I mean, the process is could be 9 to 10 months long, basically. So, if this is absolutely something you want to do, just make sure that you're planning ahead and you know when the application is opening, and so you can get it submitted in time. For language schools, however, very different. Really, you can find work at any month throughout the year. You do want to be, this applies to Korea and Japan and actually pretty much any country around the world. But if there are major holidays, typically those aren't the best times to, try to get over there or to start applying. Usually it's a couple weeks at a time or so, just depending on where we're talking about. But however, with Japan, I mean, if you're looking to teach in a language school, they really have openings throughout the year. So again, it's very similar to Korea. I would say for most people, it takes approximately 3 to 4 months from start to finish. With Japan, you can start your application, start interviewing, get all of that set up, and once you get a job offer, it usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks for you to get your COE or what's needed for your work permit before you can actually go over there. So that's why the process usually takes about 3 to 4 months from start to finish. However, too, with the thing with Japan is that a lot of the language schools, at least some of the big ones, actually do they're interviewing in the US or Canada or Australia, or they're actually in-person interviews. So depending on if you're applying to some of those schools, you might want to check that out and just make sure when their interviewing time is and when they're hiring. Okay. All right, that was a lot of information. I know there's a lot going on here. So hopefully you guys are bearing with me. So also for Japan, so, what the steps you need to take in finding a job there. So very similar, again, to Korea, is really trying to get those documents started. So the resume and cover letter, as I mentioned, getting your photos, your passport, making sure that's completely up to date, your university and college diploma, background checks, things like that. With Japan, though, you don't need transcripts and you don't need to do a lot of that apostille stuff that you do for Korea. So, however, if you are looking at the JET program, there's definitely additional documents that are going to be requested, and potentially even by your employer, but definitely for the JET program. So you'll need a criminal record check. You might need transcripts for the JET program, letters of recommendation. JET also requires a statement of purpose, which, you know, I'm definitely happy to read through those as well. So those are typically about a 2-page essay asking about your motivation and qualifications for teaching in Japan. Okay, so definitely kind of start looking at some of these documents and getting those prepared. And then next, what you'll want to do is start applying. So if you are looking at the public schools, JET, and then also another program called Interact is an option as well. So that actually has 2 times a year where Interact hires, and they also place teachers in public schools around Japan as well. And then for the private schools, we have some awesome options. If any of you have seen this Japan Language School Finder, it's huge. It's approximately 300 pages. It's very large, but it's very comprehensive, so you can absolutely use that to apply to private schools directly. And then we also work with 2 private schools called Amity and Nova. So you'll see those 2 are listed right under the Japan School Finder. And we have separate applications for those, so they know exactly you're coming directly from ITA. There's also GABA, which is a more one-on-one tutoring type of opportunity, which is pretty cool. And then we also have EON and ECC are another 2. We're not partnered with them, but they're other 2 really big language school chains that quite a few people do work for. And EON and Amity are actually sister schools. So EON caters to adults and Amity caters more towards children. Okay. Also for Japan, you can definitely work with, there's a few recruiters. So I actually would recommend going all of these routes and just trying them all, honestly. So ITTTI is a recruiter that recruits for a language school in Japan called Peppy Kids Club. Kind of a funny name, but we've had quite a few students work for them. Actually, one of our ambassadors last round, Kelsey, works for them and just really enjoys it. So definitely a good recruiter for that school. And then also Teach Away and Footprints are another 2 recruiters you can take a look at. Job boards too, I mean, there's quite a few for Japan. 2 really good ones are called Gangjinpot, excuse my pronunciation of that, and then also Ohio Sensei. So 2 really good job boards for teaching English in Japan. So absolutely, I personally recommend using all of these resources and applying to, you know, as many places as you want. But just make sure you keep track of where you're applying. Oh, and the name of the school is called Peppy Kids Club. Okay, so that concludes all of the information for this webinar on teaching English in Japan and South Korea. So I hope that you guys feel like you have a little bit more information and just, you know, kind of the basics at least down. I'm definitely going to take some time now and answer some of the questions that you guys sent in the chat box. However, if some of you may need to go, you can absolutely contact the Student Affairs Department to set up an appointment. We do have a job search guidance contact form, so it'll pair you up with a Student Affairs advisor, and you guys can set up a phone or a Skype appointment. We can communicate via email, review resume, cover letter, contracts, all of that good stuff. So we are absolutely here to help you. So all of you, thank you again so much for spending this hour with me. Good luck on your job searches, and I will get to your questions as soon as I can. So thank you.